What's going on, people? Listen to the episode of Denmark and Marsh. We talked a lot about the Gators. Graham, I kind of want to talk about the college football playoff in general. Obviously, we're going to talk about the new college football playoff with 12 teams and yada, yada, yada. All right, I got a theory, and you tell me how I am on this theory.
You're wrong.
All right, next topic. I'm hearing from everybody. It doesn't matter if it's national radio, local radio, college football, just in general. All this pressure's on Ryan Day, and they're talking about that he's got to beat Michigan, he's got to win the Big Ten, and he's got to do well in the playoff, or he might be out. And I'm just sitting here thinking, I'm like, most of us can agree that if you go 10-2, you're pretty much going to make the playoff. You might have, I think, one undefeated team. Max, I'd say you have 2 1-loss teams, and then everybody else can have 2 or 3 losses. And then the conversation is going to be, if you're 9-3, you're going to get it as a 12 seed or 11 seed. If your group of 5 champion is not good, they'll get a 12 seed and whatever. I think it's going to be the season's going to be based on, 1, do you make the playoff, and 2, how well do you do in the playoff. I don't think the regular season is going to matter as much anymore. And I kind of wrote in our notes here that rivalries don't matter. Like, how many times did Auburn play Alabama in the kick 6 game, and that game literally meant everything? Like, yeah. Alabama's season was over because they lost that game. Or, you can go a couple of years later when they played again and Auburn wins the West, and Alabama's season's over off of that one game, and Alabama was 11-0. Ohio State just a couple of years ago, they lost to Michigan, still getting in the playoff, almost beat Georgia, and then almost played for the title game. Had Ohio State, and I know that's a one-off, but if Ohio State won that title, nobody's going to be moping around in Columbus saying they lost to Michigan.
Yeah.
And so basically, to wrap this up as a whole, I don't think, the meaning of the regular season, I don't think it's going to matter as much. I just think that everybody, college football, we're going to base everything on the playoff. And for Florida, if Florida goes 7-5 and say they lose 2 games late down the stretch to Ole Miss or LSU or whomever, Texas, FSU, and those teams are in the playoff and Florida loses at the tail end, I think every Florida fan, if Florida goes 7-5 or 8-4, whatever, every Florida fan going into the offseason is going to say, man, we were 2 plays away from making the playoff, and Billy's got to stay. You agree or disagree?
I kind of half agree. I don't know if I would go as far as say the regular season doesn't, like, it obviously matters, but you're not saying it doesn't matter, but you're arguing that it's going to be significantly watered down. The regular season will be. I don't know if I'll go that far. It's definitely not going to be as crucial because in the past it's been, if you're in an easier conference, you lose 1 game, that's it. If you're in like the SEC or the Big Ten, you lose 2 games, that's it. And you can probably lose 2 to 3 now and still make it. So I hear you there. I would push back a little bit on the rivalries thing. I think you are right nationally with the national perception of how rivalry games are going to be. And we even saw a little bit of that when we entered into the 4-team playoff. Once we entered into the 4-team playoff, I felt like I was noticing from a national perspective, the Florida State game didn't have as much national attention. The Texas and Oklahoma game still did, so that's not a great example. Like USC, UCLA didn't have as much national attention. Like those types of rivalries that aren't like seemingly every year competing for, like Ohio State, Michigan has still had that same national relevance because basically every year that's been the first round of the playoffs for both of those 2 teams. Florida State and Clemson last couple of years, I felt like nationally has not been as relevant as it was a little bit before that in the BCS era. Florida State, Miami, same thing. So Florida, Tennessee, I would put in that category. Florida, LSU, I would put in that category. Those games, since the 14 playoff came in, I have felt like have not been as big of a deal on a national scale unless one or both teams were competing for one of those 4 spots. So that will probably happen even more now, which would support your theory. What I have also noticed, though, is it has not made much of a difference locally. For that specific school, it's still extremely, extremely, extremely important to Gator fans to beat Florida State and vice versa. It's still extremely, extremely important for USC, UCLA, for Florida, LSU, Florida, for all these different games, right? Because I think when you grow up a fan of that team, and if you went to that school, or if you live there, or you have any type of significant ties to that school, that pride is still there as strong as it's ever been. I just think nationally it doesn't matter as much.
I'll say for the fans it does, but for the players it doesn't. It doesn't mean nowhere near as much as it.
I'd probably agree with that.
Because I mean, just look for instance, Etienne, like that dude just straight up left Florida. He was going to be the lead dude, and he just leaves and says, "I'm going to Georgia." Why I want to go to Georgia? I want to win. Like you would never see that before. You know, I had the opportunity. My first year of coaching, Gus Scott was with our staff in Baldwin for a year, and he was talking about, you know, when he came up, you know, everybody in the state either went to Florida State, or Miami, and all 3 of those schools were all competing for those guys in state. Now it's not like that. I mean,
now they go to Clemson, they go to Texas, they go to
they go wherever. Like you had the Mandarin safety. He originally he's at Miami now, but originally commits to USC. Like I've been in Jacksonville my whole life. I'm 26. Like I can never remember when somebody left Florida to go to California. You got I take that back. There was Ben Edwards from Trinity. He went to Stanford, but that's obviously Stanford. He was high academic.
I mean, look at last year's recruiting class. One of the best quarterback, probably the best quarterback in the whole area from Trinity, Colin Hurley. Born and raised Jacksonville, lived in Jacksonville, and now he's at LSU.
The rivalries will always matter to fans, but I don't think you don't have the same hatred that you do from players, and that's where like Florida Miami. It's like for the fan base, it's massive because Florida Miami's always been Florida's dug Miami because Florida joined the SEC and yada yada yada, and that goes back decades. And kids don't care about that. Kids care about literally what's happened in the last 5 years. Maybe, and then that's it. And then what's right now. I mean, unless something's personal, like I was on the 7-on-17 with this kid in high school, and he went in the game. He plays for Florida, and I play for Miami. Like you've already had Graham Hurts calling them out, saying that Miami was trash on that podcast, which is kind of crazy. But you just don't see that no more because like there's just not that same hatred that goes back and forth.
But is that because of the playoff and how the playoff is formatted, or is that because of A, coach movement, and B, the portal?
I think it's the portal. I don't think it's coach movement because coach movement's always been there. Which is funny because one of Florida's coaches just left to go to Georgia. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's coach movement. I think it's the portal. I think it's more of the society that the hang around and wait your turn that Carson Beck has done at Georgia. That's almost obsolete now. Like that doesn't happen no more because there's just so much opportunity to jump ship and go. And I think I didn't even expect to get into this. Like the NCAA just approved that you can extend scholarships. It goes from 85 to 105 in football. So now football guys or coaches can now extend rosters. Okay, so now you're going to have more guys. That means you're going to have more guys, I think, leave. More guys be unhappy. And fewer guys stay. Because it's all about –
more guys equals more movement.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's all it's going to mean. And if the NCAA changes or some college football czar or whatever comes along – I don't think this gets any easier or it gets any better. I think it's just going to continue to get worse.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day, and thinking about Trevor Etienne, and I was thinking about how I feel like unless I'm missing somebody, since the transfer portal has been what it is, I think he's the first guy of like pretty high profile, like high status like going to play a lot, going to be a star on the team type of guy, go from one arch rival to another. Am I correct in that? Am I missing someone that's done that? Like,
Yeah,
has there been another guy?
Nobody's left Ohio State, went to Michigan.
Yeah, Oklahoma gone to Texas.
Yeah, no, not that I can think of. The only one is
there's been a couple Georgia guys like Jalen Kimber and Brenton Cox that were at Georgia and went to Florida, but neither of those guys were like stars.
Right.
Trevor Etienne's the first guy, and it's even more so because he's on offense, like a stud that went from one arch bitter rival to another. The reason I'm making that point is not to say that it's not happening. The reason I make that point is to say he might be the first I can think of, but he is not going to be the last. There's no shot he'll be.
And Burton, I'm almost positive that Burton left left Georgia, went to Bama because of money. I think that's all. I think it's basically what it was. If I'm not,
and you're talking about Jermaine Burton, the wide receiver.
Yes.
Yeah.
Etienne just said this program ain't good, and I want to go to a program that's good. I'm going to Georgia.
Well, and Alabama and Georgia are rivals right now, I think, because they're just good, and you have the Saban Kirby thing. But I'm talking like bitter arch rivals. I'm talking like Bama Auburn type rival. I'm talking Florida Georgia type, Florida State type thing. Like Bama and Georgia are rivals right now just because they're in the same conference. One has been in the East, one has been in the West, and they find themselves at the top.
Yeah.
But like in terms of like most, I mean, not even most, every Gator fan that you ask, what team do you hate the most, is going to tell you either Florida State or Georgia. And that it really depends, which one you say kind of depends on your age.
Yeah.
But he went to one of those schools. Like, that's a big deal. But I think, again, I don't believe Trevor Etienne is going to be the last one to do that, particularly when you find schools where one side of the rivalry is in rough shape and the other side is in really good shape, like Florida and Georgia is right now. Because Florida, and I think this is part of the reason that a lot of Florida fans are so upset by Trevor Etienne's transfer, outside of the fact that Gator fans are just emotional. If you remember that recruiting cycle, Florida kind of took a chance on Trevor Etienne. It wasn't like he was he was a highly touted player. He was a 4-star back, but it wasn't like he was the number one back in the country. Florida was one of the higher offers he had, and Billy Napier was new to the job, and the closest school to Jacksonville, where his brother Travis plays, and it was kind of like a homey type of feel when he came to Florida, right? It kind of felt like, okay, this was like a match made in heaven, and we're kind of family now type of thing. So it like really, I think, upset a lot of Gator fans when he left. And to your point, though, like Trevor Etienne, was he a guy that we thought of like that's going to be a Gator lifer? Even before he transferred. Like, not really.
I remember he committed, didn't think anything of it, and then whatever that first game was, I guess it had to been Utah.
Yep.
He's doing well. I'm like, yo, this guy's doing pretty good. Like he's all right.
You and I were at that game together. It jumped off the page that he was playing a lot.
Yes.
He was getting a lot of snaps. And he remember he had the near fumble. He did fumble, but he recovered it. Remember that play?
Yes.
But besides that, he did play well, like you're saying. But back in 2022, you had Montreal Johnson coming in from Louisiana, who everybody kind of knew was going to be a significant role in the team. Otherwise, Napier wouldn't have brought him over. And then Naquan Wright was still on the team. So the thinking was Naquan Wright and Montreal Johnson are going to be the main two backs. And then all of a sudden, this third guy's getting the ball in first couple of carries. You and I are kind of like, who is that? We're like, oh, that's Trevor Etienne. And, by last season, he and Ricky Pearsall were their best offensive skill players. I agree with you, though, to the core of the theory that you're making, that it doesn't mean to the players what it once did. When you think Texas, you think Vince Young. When you think Florida, you think Tim Tebow or Spurrier or that kind of guy. when I think, and even to bring it to more recent times, to think of like even like ultra successful players at certain teams because of the portal, because of movement, and perhaps because of the way the playoff is now and the regular season being a little bit watered down. When I think LSU, I don't think Jaden Daniels.
No, he transferred and he just got there.
You know what I mean? He was there he had a cup of coffee there, was really good, won the Heisman, and now he's in the league. But those lifer type of players, those like ride or die, like synonymous with the school type of guys, I think are a thing of the past.
Let me throw one more theory at you, and probably just. I'm not saying this is going to happen. I was just thinking about this. So in baseball, the last year or so, they added an extra wild card team.
Yeah.
And when those wild card teams play each other, they play right after the regular season, and the 1 seed gets a bye. The last 2 years, the Braves have been good. The Dodgers have been good. They get knocked out early, and the wild card teams, they get hot because baseball, you play every day. It's not something where you play, you take a whole week off, and then, it's hard to come back and have your bats hot immediately. So I was thinking, the 1 through 4 are going to get the bye, and then everybody else is going to be playing. And in college football, you can look back in the past where if you can go back to, like, I can remember when Cam Newton played the national title game, they played Oregon, Chip Kelly's offense. Everybody's expecting a shootout. Everybody's expecting 42-35, 40-40-something. Ended up being final score 22-19, a bunch of field goals. Because you have, you play December, the first weekend of December, and then you don't play again until the first weekend of January. It's a lot of time off. Do you think that having buys in the college football playoff is going to hurt them having an extra week off when everybody else is playing an extra week?
So we're debating rest versus rust, right?
Yeah.
Think like the same thing in the NFL playoffs. Like sometimes the playoff team that gets the bye comes out a little slow, like their first quarter, first half. And then other teams, it's really beneficial for them to have the bye. I think it's the same thing. I think it depends. It's case by case basis on that team.
Isn't it a little different though? Because in the NFL, you're going to get 1 week off, and it's always used to it. College football, they've never done it, and I think they're getting. I think after the regular season or the championship game, they're getting a week off, and then they're going to the playoff. So it's like Christmas, and everybody else is playing New Year's.
I still think it's a case by case basis, because if you have a team like say you had a team that maybe started slow early in the season, had like a week 1 through like 4 loss, and then by the end of the season got really hot, wins their conference championship, makes the playoffs, that kind of thing, and they're really hot, getting a lot of momentum toward the end of the season, that team would benefit to keep playing, in my opinion. Now, especially if they started slow, that team's probably not going to be a team getting a bye week in the first place, but you get the point of what I'm saying. Versus if you have like a really strong X's and O's type of coach and you give him extra time to prepare, and it can be kind of like an Andy Reid after a bye week type of situation, I believe that's advantageous to get that extra time off. Or if some of your key guys are banged up, then that helps obviously to get the time off as well.
Yeah, I think it's for most teams, other than the coaching, like we've seen Nick Saban be almost undefeated week 1 of every season, and him perform pretty much every first playoff game other than the first one they played against in Ohio State with Zeke. I think if you have a high-powered offense that goes off tempo, you don't want that break, because you're so used to that tempo, and you take 3 weeks off, it's not going to be good. This is something else I just thought of. So most teams are going to end on Thanksgiving weekend. Some teams are going to play the first weekend of December for the championship games, and then you're going to have a week off after the championship game and then play that December 20th. So really, if you have a bye, you get 3 weeks off, and if you're ending the regular season to the first round of the playoff, it's 3 weeks off. So really, there's not that much of a difference if you look at it from that standpoint. I don't know. It was just a theory. That's something I just thought about because I know that baseball's had this issue. You've seen a little bit with the NFL, but I hate comparing it to the NFL because I just don't think the NFL is like you always see, them comparing it with the playoff and have an automatic qualifier with conferences, but college football is not the NFL in any aspect. I don't think. The SEC is so much different than the Big 12. There's not much of a difference in the NFC South. That's probably the worst division compared to the NFC North. Like, there's a difference, but it's not that much.
Any team from the NFC South can beat any team from the North in any given week, and it's not like that crazy.
Right. So I just don't. I have a thing in my mind how the playoff is going to work, and I think Georgia's going to win. And there's nothing really that's going to change my mind just because I think they're the best team. They got the most talent, yada yada yada. But really, that 5 through 12. I'm pretty sure you're going to see 4 SEC teams, 3 Big Ten teams, maybe 4 Big Ten, and then 1 from each other conference, and then that's it. I wouldn't be surprised with. I would be surprised if the Big 12 got 2 teams, or if the ACC could have 3 teams. Like I don't see Florida State, Miami, and Clemson all having a team in there.
I think the ACC might have 1.
The only reason I say maybe 3 is because they're taking the top 2. Miami only plays Florida State. They don't play Clemson. So if they're 10-2, it's kind of hard to get them out. And then Clemson could go 11-1, lose to FSU, lose to FSU again, and then you can say Clemson make the playoff. That's the only reason why I say that. It's just I don't know. I kind of like that we're having this conversation because before it was always just ho hum, same old, 4 teams, no newness. I think that's really the conversation: the 5 through 12 in the playoff.
Can we end this episode with tying this to the Gators real quick?
Yeah.
What does Florida's record have to be at worst to make the playoff? They're not going to make the playoff. We all know this, but let's just have fun while it's still July.
I want to say 8-4, but it's got to be 9-3.
I think so too.
I think 8-4.
I've heard the Florida schedule is so hard. 8-4 could potentially do it, and maybe if the stars align correctly and everything happens, sure. But realistically, I think 9-3. I'll say this: I think they're probably the only team in the entire country that could go 8-4 and potentially make it, though.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Nobody else. It's even a conversation. Isn't that insane, though, to think about? Like, their schedule, Florida's schedule is so hard that what is considered an acceptable season for Billy Napier in terms of record is like a 2-game difference from what could potentially get him in the playoff. Isn't that insane?
Yes, but I think
know
we're
it's
just
12
saying that
teams, so
because
it's different. It's not the same as the 4, but still.
I think we're saying that because they're not good. Like if this Florida team is good, I don't think we're talking about the schedule because it's more of, okay, you haven't beaten Kentucky the last 2 years. You haven't beaten LSU since Joe Burrow threw that pick 6. A&M has been kind of, off and on, and you don't know, you've had success with them. You haven't had success against them since they've been in the SEC. If Florida's good, if Florida is not 2020 good, but just decent. I don't think that we're having the schedule. I don't think we're having this talk about how hard the schedule is. I think we're having a conversation about the schedule's tough, but I think it's more of, okay, we know we haven't been good the last 2 years. This is do or die for Billy. And, we have this really tough schedule.
I sort of agree. I kind of agree with you. I don't fully agree. I think if Georgia had this schedule, people would talk about it being difficult. Not as much as they do with Florida, because with Florida, a national media person sees Florida losing all these games versus Georgia, they'd see them winning. So I hear you. I get what you're saying, and I agree a little bit. I think if Florida was better, it wouldn't be made out. It wouldn't be as big of a topic of conversation. I mean, people that are not Gator fans that I've talked to this offseason that are just college football fans and they're fans of a different team and they want to talk about the Gators, the first thing they always bring up is the schedule. So that I'll probably give you. If they're a little better, that wouldn't be the first thing they'd bring up. They'd bring up how good Mertz is or how good Wilson is, or could they maybe backdoor their way into the SEC title game or something like that if they were a better team. So I agree with you there that it probably wouldn't be quite as big of a talking point, but it still remains that schedule is arguably the hardest in the history of the sport, though.
I think we're going to get halfway through the year and we're going to see the haves and have-nots. Like Miami is like the national media darling right now. Everybody expects them to do really good. Everybody thinks Mike Elko is going to be a good guy at A&M. And then you can go on and on. And people expect LSU to be right on that verge of the college football playoff. I think half of those teams aren't going to have a good year because it's always like that every year. We always get this time in July and August, and everybody in the talking season says they're going to be good, and we expect this, we expect that, and then we get through the year and it's like, it's not what we thought. Oh, this injury happened. Oh, this, we got the injury bug here, or this coach isn't what we thought he was going to be. I think we're going to get 7 games in, and of the 8 or 9 games that we think are really, really tough, I think we're going to have like 5 or 6. Now, it's still a lot compared to mostly everybody, but I don't think it's as tough as what we think right now.
I hear you, and when I've done Gator Bites with Hacker this offseason, he's brought up that same exact point, how it's a couple people when they really break it down have said, Florida's schedule is really hard in terms of logos, like his logos you're familiar with. It's a hard logo schedule. It's a hard it passes the eye test, if you will, but that doesn't necessarily mean all these teams are going to be good on paper, to your point. Or sorry, they're good on paper, but they're not going to be good in real life, to your point. I get that. Here's the problem with that, though. Like, the opposite can also be true. Like, Ole Miss might not be what they're cracked up to be, okay? But Kentucky might be better than they're supposed to be. Texas A&M might be better than they're supposed to be. So I hear you. I don't think – it's not like, people have said, man, 8 to 9 of Florida's opponents could finish in the top 10. That's not going to happen, obviously. Or not 8 or 9, but you know what I mean. That isn't going to happen. I get that. But again, say Miami's not as good as the national media is making them out to be, which I think they're not as good as the national media is making them out to be. And maybe A&M, same thing. But what if Mississippi State's better than they're supposed to be? What if Kentucky's better than they're supposed to be? What if Tennessee is back to 2022 Tennessee and they're one of the best teams in the country? Like, it's just, but like, I hear you, but the opposite can be true, is my point.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. UCF had a losing record in the first year with them being in the Big 12.
Yeah. What if UCF is really good? What if UCF is like 2017 fake national title year, UCF? Like, that team, look, I know we make fun of the national championship thing and everything. That team would beat this Florida team.
Oh, 100%.
By 10 plus points, even in the Swamp.
Yeah, that team had talent. And the thing with football is anybody can be beaten at any given day. You see that a lot in basketball and baseball. But with football, like when you have even talent, you have a bad day with turnovers or your guys weren't focused throughout the week and, they're looking at the next game. Like, that's the thing with this schedule. Like, any of these teams could just slip up and beat you, and it's not a surprise.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say at least like 7 to 8 of their games, if Florida has 2 turnovers in the first half, they're almost guaranteed going to lose. Whatever that game is. Like Tennessee, for example. You're telling me in Knoxville they could turn the ball over twice in the first half and win? That's not going to happen. No chance. No. And you just think about that, like, some people might be listening to this like, well, yeah, of course, if you turn the ball over, like, you're going to lose. But my whole point about this is you spend an entire offseason knowing what the schedule is, knowing who you got to play, developing your team, putting all the hours in. Your team's in the gym, your team's on the practice field going over things. Billy Napier coaches the guys up, yada, yada, yada. It's an entire thing. We talk about this. We go to media days. We all spend the whole offseason talking about things and all this time, right? Week 1 happens in about 10 minutes. Graham Mertz gets strip sacked, and they give up a long bomb. Well, first game might be about it. And you know this, you know how quickly this stuff happens. So that type of stuff worries me a bit with this team because it's not the margin for error. This is the other thing I'll say about with the schedule, and you kind of talking about how that we're talking more about it because they're not very good. This is, I think, to have what the Gator fan base would consider a good season. It's the smallest margin of error maybe in the history of Gator football that they can afford to have.
Yes. And I can't think of a second one where it's like, oh, well, if this happens, like, no, this is all 100% based on what's on the field, based on wins and losses.
And based on only a pretty small amount of things need to go wrong for them to lose these games.
Yeah.
I mean, Georgia and Texas, they would have to literally play a flawless game to win.
Yeah. I mean, that's football in general. That's for any program. But when you're stacked, when you've had 3 consecutive losing seasons, 2 under the current coach, under a program that's something that hasn't been done since, the civil rights movement, which has been forever ago for any kid. Like it's not acceptable. You're not going to last.
Yeah.
It's that simple. So, all right, Graham, I'm about done here. You done? I think that wraps up pretty much what we got.
Yes, sir.
All right. I'm out of here. Dylan Denmark. I'm Dylan Denmark. That's Graham Marsh. Get us on Twitter at 1010XL, Graham at 1010XL Denmark. We'll see y'all next episode.